at 5, Peter Pumpkin Eater. The story begins with our author looking through his telescope at the moon, trying his best to be quiet because he knew his mother would be upset if she caught him up so late. Everything was normal until a low grumble was heard out in the night. He assumed it was his mother coming to check up on him, so he jumped into bed and under the covers. He heard footsteps, then another grumble. This time though, he could make out faint words. Was his mother talking to someone? The sound began to grow louder, getting closer and closer to his door. It sounded as though a large metal object was being dragged across the floorboards. He shouted out, "Mother, is that you?" But nothing. It became clear that whoever was there was singing a melody, but it was too masculine to be his mother. The noises got louder and louder. Lightning then struck, lighting up the room for a brief moment. Our author could see in the mirror opposite that he was not alone. He leapt out of his bed into the corner of the room, hiding under his teddy bears. He lifted his head, and there it was, a shadowy figure standing in the darkness. The figure then whispered in an eerie tone,
Peter, Pumpkin Eater, had a wife but couldn't keep her. He kept her in the pumpkin shell, and there he kept it very well. Peter, Pumpkin Eater, had another and didn't love her. Up the chimney he did shove her.
And that's where our creepypasta ends. In a log added later, it details how the mother and son were found dismembered inside their chimney. No details were left behind, and the killer may still be on the loose. Coming in at number 4, we have Unwanted Tenants. Posted to Reddit by user Vanilla Gorilla, they tell of an awful time they spent in a potentially haunted home. I quote, "My daughter was 4 years old when we lived in our last home. I was a single mum at the time, so it was just she and I alone in the home. I always got an uncomfortable feeling in her room, particularly in the closet area, but never thought much of it. Until one evening, I had to put her to bed, and as I was doing chores, I walked by her room and heard her whispering. I listened for a bit, thinking she was talking to herself, but it was definitely a two-way conversation, with her saying, okay, and stuff like that. I walked in and asked her who she was talking to. She smiled uncomfortably and said, no one. I took her out into the hall and she wouldn't say anything, but I could tell she was afraid. Finally, we went outside of the house. She said there was a man in her room who didn't want us in the house, and he had told her this and to tell her mum to leave. Moved us out a month later. She has not since ever had an episode like this. Honestly, this reminds me of something straight out of the Amityville Horror, The Others, or even The Conjuring 2, with the old man in his chair. If a spirit wants you out the house, I highly suggest you just get out of the house while you can. Don't with the dead. Coming in at number 3, The Doppelganger. Posted to Reddit by Quiet Voice 4846, they discuss the time they saw something very peculiar in the mirror. I quote, "Late at night I usually go to the bathroom multiple times, but for the past 4 days, every time I go to leave, I can see myself standing in the mirror from the corner of my eye. It is like the other me is watching me leave the bathroom. It terrifies me to the point where I almost run out without looking directly at the mirror. I never told my husband about it because I didn't want to acknowledge it out loud. Earlier today I took a nap in our bed while he sat in the chair next to it watching TV. When I woke up he told me that he had seen me sit up and crawl backward to the edge of the bed and stand in front of our bedroom door from the corner of his eye. He thought it was weird that I got up like that because I'm in my last month of my pregnancy and I can't really move so good without it hurting, so he tried talking to me. When I didn't answer, he looked at the door to find me not there and still sleeping in bed. I got really creeped out and I finally told him about what I had been seeing in the bathroom. He thought it was creepy as well, but didn't really want to talk about it anymore because he thinks it will give whatever it is power or energy. I have no idea what it wants or why we both saw it. Honestly, if I were them, I would leave that house and never look back. Or she's having a demon baby. That as well. I think it's a demon baby. Coming in at number 2, Haunted Hotels. Posted to Reddit by Bright_eyes10, they state, when I was 15 I travelled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Etzel, Germany in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor, my sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room, all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing her. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. plus she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that the wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when at about 2 AM, I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of my bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness, like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the lights on only to have there be nothing there. The window was locked from the inside, there was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared. The user goes on to state that the next morning she tells her sister about what happened, but what she doesn't expect is that her sister also saw the same silhouetted figure standing in the corner of the room. Absolutely terrifying. No thank you. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Purgatory Road. Posted to Reddit by an unknown user, they tell of the time they took a road trip from New York City to Rhode Island back in August of 2018. And quote, "None of us had been to Rhode Island before, so we were excited about the drive, especially because we had rented a Mustang convertible for it. We left a little later than expected. It was about 10:30 PM, and since it was a busy Friday night, we decided to punch our destination into the Waze traffic app to beat the traffic." Love the subtle Waze promo there. Respect. Anyway, they continue by saying, "Eventually we started losing steam, so my friend in the backseat fell asleep and I just kept driving along quietly, when my friend in the passenger seat told me to exit the freeway to take a side road. At first, driving on the unlit winding back roads was relaxing, but then the wind picked up and it got increasingly foggy and misty. I wasn't scared per se, just a little on edge. I thought about pulling over to put the top up but decided against it since there were no cars in sight. Heavy rain was projected for the entire weekend, so I wanted to get the most out of the convertible, so I kept going along as normal, if not a little too fast to get back to the main roads as quickly as possible when something just shifted. I don't know how to explain it other than an unsettling exposed feeling. I remember pulling my sweater over my legs to cover up. Then my friend up front told me to look at the street sign in the distance. It read, Purgatory. Seconds later we went around a bend where a large red cross was installed. Then around the next bend, a big truck came hurtling down the one-lane road aimed straight at us. The user goes on to state that they swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding getting crushed by the truck. They all felt disturbed and unsettled about what had happened. However, the user decided to look up the road, which was revealed to be situated next to an old graveyard. They also discovered that 2 teen girls had died there in August of 2011 in an accident on their way to visit the grave of Rhode Island's infamous vampire Mercy Brown, who died in 1892. Apparently they decided to go down the dark windy road because they thought it looked haunted. Turns out it may very well be.
Coming in at number 5, the Corwin Witch House. The Jonathan Corwin House in Salem, or simply known better as the Witch House, was the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin, 1640 to 1718, a prominent figure in the horrors that happened there, and is actually the only structure you can visit in Salem today that has direct ties to the Salem witch trials of 1692. Well, that might not be the case because we got a couple of those coming up. Trust me, this place is riddled with ties to those witches. Corwin bought the house in 1675 and lived there for more than 40 years. The Witch House is a 350-year-old thick building with black painted timber, 2.5 stories tall, built to last, massive and looming. Located at 310 Essex Street in the historic district of Salem, the house stands in testimony to the witch trials, and it's believed that the Witch House was used by Jonathan Corwin and others to actually interrogate those accused of witchcraft. The Witch House remained with the Corwins, of course, until the mid-1800s, yet there wasn't many family around to liven it up. The Corwin curse seems like a weird one since all the Corwin's kids, 5 children, all perished young from separate complications within the house. And this is where it gets really weird. Not only is the place haunted to hell and back with specters seen in the attic upstairs and loud voices, arguments heard in the empty house at night, 8 Corwin lives were lost to premature death in that house. All Corwins. Yeah, I'd say that makes for a pretty cursed home, alright? A family curse.
In at 4, A Normal Halloween Night. This creepypasta documents the final time our author ever celebrated Halloween. When he was 10, there was news that a serial killer was on the loose in his area. That didn't deter him or his friends though. They got dressed up and ventured out for a night of Halloween fun. The first house they went to, an old woman answered the door. She began to panic and said, Good costume. The kids were confused as they knew their Halloween costumes were subpar at best, but they took the candy regardless. The next house they went to, a similar incident occurred. A middle-aged man answered the door and said, "Jesus, don't scare me like that." They looked at each other confused and responded, "What do you mean?" He replied, "It's a very good costume, nothing more." He then gave them a lot of candy, but our author couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. They then went to a house at the end of the street where a crazy woman lived. Again, they scared her. "Good costume," she said. "That's the best costume I've ever seen." Our author finally broke and responded, "Whose costume?" She replied, "The guy in the serial killer costume behind you." Ugh. In at 3, My Last Halloween. Our author begins this story by describing one particular Halloween when he took his children out trick-or-treating. It was an unspoken rule that you only knock on the doors of the homes with lights on, but this particular night the eldest child wanted to knock on the door of a towering 2-story house that for the past 2 seasons had been vacant. The author had noticed a moving truck parked outside a month back, so he agreed and his children approached. They knocked, but there was no answer. After a moment or two, the door slowly creaked open and a voice beckoned. "Trick or treat." The children cheered. The father felt something was off though and approached before the voice rang out again.
"I choose both."
2 hands then appeared, pulling both of the children inside. The door slammed shut and our author pounded and pounded, but there was no response. He then proceeded to kick down the door, shouting out to his children. They searched the house, but to no avail. The children were not there. It has now been a year and there has been no word. In at 2, The Masked Man. Our author in this creepypasta documents a handful of days over the Halloween period with his son James, who was adamant on dressing up as Buzz Lightyear. During the lead up to the big day, our author was preparing for his son's arrival, as he only gets special holidays following the split from his wife. On the night of October 22nd, our author details seeing a creepy man lurking around his property, almost scoping it out. He hid out of sight and peeked through the window, trying to catch a glimpse of who the masked figure was. He drew back the curtains and came face to face with the snooper, who was donning a mask similar to the one from the Scream franchise, only this time the jaw seemed to be swaying in the wind, and it had fang-like teeth. The masked man's left eye began to scan around, drifting away from where it fixated, locating our author. As it did, it disappeared. Now hopping over to October 25th, our author has a bizarre encounter with one of his neighbours that he doesn't know too well. He had placed a bowl of candy outside with a chicken scratch sign that read, "Take one." Oddly though, the sign was smeared in bloody fingerprints. He then recounts how the one and only time he had encountered his neighbour, he was looking distraught and rushing out of his house. He had said that he was late for work, which our author found odd as it was 8:30 at night. The neighbour then said he worked as a biologist at a military base and said no more. Heading into October 28th, our author has yet another encounter with the masked man. This time though it was much more sinister. Our author recalled hearing the sound of a cat screeching. He approached his window and saw the masked man, only this time its entire body. It ran like an ostrich. It was spotted with spindly hairs and blue veins, and its head appeared to be decomposing. The cat hopped a fence and the masked man followed, effortlessly leaping after it. It's now the night of the 30th. At 12:15 AM, our author hears an aggressive knock at the door. He answers. It's the neighbour, but not the creepy one, the one who lives behind him. He accuses him of scaring his wife with that creepy mask. Our author is offended that he could ever possibly think it was him, but pleased that others have been seeing the masked madman. The neighbour goes on to say, I quote, "I saw you jump clean over that fence of yours and crawl right back into your basement." Wait, what? Concerned, he opens the door to see his son just as he had left him, sleeping facing the wall. He returns to the neighbour who says, "Just stay the hell away from me and my family," before an aggressive tone takes over him and a chuckle erupts with bottomless blue eyes emerging, the same eyes he saw outside. He then says, "I gotta hand it to you though. I nearly busted out laughing when I saw you running around wearing your little kid's Buzz Lightyear costume. What the fuck?" In at 1, Trick or Treat. Now this creepypasta opens with the line, "Don't bother trying to find it. You won't find anything about the name of the town or what happened here." Yikes. I'm not sure I want to proceed, but let's proceed. The author begins by taking us back to All Hallows Eve in the old country, and how they were the first to celebrate the occasion as a holiday. He describes how the natives were confused by their behaviour at this time of year, but left them alone out of fear. On this night they went out on their settlement, collecting apples and tarts. The author's little girl dressed as the Queen of England. Thank you, sir. She promised to return after sundown and not to linger too long at the households of the community. I'm getting nervous. The community was unaware of the house at the edge of the settlement until children began to enter. It was unlit and had no windows or fire to speak of, but the house seemed to be shimmering. Our author questioned it, asking other settlers about the house, but they all thought him odd, saying, "What do you mean? There's no house there. They're going to play by the stockades." He decided to venture out towards the house the children were heading towards, and what he saw through the cracks of the house unsettled him. He drew his knife, entering the home, but when he got inside he knew his knife would be useless against the forces inside. There he saw a black cloud, entering the nose and mouth of his daughter, as well as the rest of the children from the settlement. But before he could react, the black smoke entered him, and before he knew it he was outside of his body, watching on at the horrors around him. They were led back to the settlement and to the meeting hall. Parents embraced their children happily, and this is what led to the destruction of their little community. They absorbed them all, and this creepypasta is a warning to read the signs and not stray into the settlement known as Roanoke. Coming in at number 5, we have Shh, uploaded to Reddit by user Fuzzy Bandits. Love the name, big fan, 10 out of 10. They talk about the time they encountered something truly bizarre in their home. I quote, "When I was a teenager, I used to babysit my cousin Alyssa. She was little, maybe almost 2, maybe a little older, old enough to say sentences. I'm giving her a bath before bed when she looks out into the hallway and gets a terrified look on her face and starts crying. At this moment, my auntie's Pomeranian starts going nuts as well, barking and growling in the hallway. The atmosphere in the room became uncomfortable and I started getting scared. I took her downstairs from the 3rd floor in the townhouse to try and calm her down. I asked her what was wrong and she said something along the lines of, 'The man with the black eyes was there.' When I continued to pry, she looked up at the 2nd floor stairs, her eyes getting big, and looked at me, bringing her finger up to her mouth and saying, 'Shh,' or shaking her head no. No thank you, I hate every single part of this. If this happened to me, I'd be out there in a second. She can find her own babysitter. If she's old enough to talk, she's old enough to look after herself."
Number 4. Proctor's Ledge. There are over 1,000 documents from Salem witch trials, yet none of the accounts actually specify where the hangings took place. For many years it was believed that the 19 people who were executed in Salem were hanged at the summit of Gallows Hill, on the edge of town to the west, where the town would meet for large gatherings. Seems like after some homework, the hill alone would be too hard to climb, not an ideal spot to hear or see the live trials, and was too thick and heavily wooded. Maps of 1700 Salem show Gallows Hill marked on the map, but no actual marker for the execution site. I feel like a detective all of a sudden. A team of researchers began to reconsider all of the evidence around 2010, eras of homework collected over the years, and eventually concluded that the real execution spot was Proctor's Ledge. Boom, baby! This was confirmed in 2016. Part of the evidence included 1692 eyewitnesses' accounts who wrote in journals that they were able to see the hangings from their homes to actually remains being dug up and found now. Now I know what you're thinking, it's named after John Proctor. No, it's not. However, odd timing, as he was one of the witches accused of witchcraft along with 3 of his other mistresses. Locals say that the lady in white visits Proctor's Ledge. Some visitors claim to have caught the sight of her, though others catch only her disembodied voice. Are these the phantoms of the unsettled spirits tied to the grounds where they were hanged for eternity? Who knows? Number 3. Charter Street Burial Grounds. The Charter Street Burial Grounds started in 1637, also known as Old Burying Point or the Charter Street Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Salem. Many early and famous Salem residents are buried here, such as John Hawthorne, a judge in the Salem witch trials of 1692. Hawthorne, whose father had been a Salem magistrate, was born in 1641 and had 6 children. Hawthorne experienced several deaths in his family, including those of all his 3 brothers. Hawthorne died in 1717 at the age of 76, never apologizing for the role in the Salem witch trials. His headstone is surrounded by granite rectangles to help preserve what is left of the original stone. Being one of the oldest cemeteries and the sickening things that happen there, ghosts and spirits are often seen around the gravesite. There have been many strange occurrences here. Witch stuff aside, about 400 years of ghostly encounters have happened at the Old Burying Point Cemetery. Over the years, people have successfully captured EVP of voices from beyond the grave at the site. If you can hear me, say something. Stop yelling. Oh, sorry. Photographs of mysterious shadows, orbs, white mist, and even full apparitions are seen here. One of these apparitions is believed to be Mary Bright Corey, who died 1684. She was the second wife of Giles Corey, who later became an unfortunate victim of the witch trials himself. Another ghost seen is the powdered blue dress lady, whilst holding a picnic basket in one hand and sometimes accompanied by a young boy. Normally, once the cameras come out, the lady in white transitions into numerous bright orbs or vanishes altogether. Maybe the ghost woman is the same Mary Corey forever watching over Judge Hawthorne's grave. Number 2. Gallows Hill. Okay, so we were just talking about what happened to some of the accused during these hysterical trials and all the historical places that saw such violence. One of the most interesting witches tried of that was Giles Corey. Tried as a witch, but never hanged. Actually, the old man known as Giles Corey was pressed to death with the judge's orders of him being a strong and stubborn old man and would not for the life of him indulge in the nonsense he was being accused for. He never admitted that he was a witch, even throughout his torture. They laid him down and put a board on his back and proceeded to stone him to death, piling up stones on the board, resulting in crushing and eventually perishing underneath it. Only took about 4 days. Giles Corey apparently repeatedly yelled more weight, further cementing his plea of not guilty to everyone watching at Gallows Hill. With his last breath, Giles apparently cursed the town of Salem, and this area is now an unearthly hotspot for paranormal activity. The Gallows Hill that most people are aware of is nothing but a baseball diamond, but underneath that baseball diamond, bone fragments and coffins have been found. Interesting, because no witches were ever buried in coffins. Maybe vampires? Giles died from his inflicted torture on September 19th, 1692, just after the 8th anniversary of his wife Mary's passing. Strange sounds emerge from the area at night, including loud knockings, thumpings that wake up neighbors from their bed, and of course, the full-bodied apparitions said to walk the grounds yelling in the middle of the night. There have been full-bodied apparitions spotted within the woods, with disembodied voices shrieking in the middle of the night. The disturbingly loud voices yelled throughout the area have had some locals scratching their heads. Is this the ghost of Giles himself, speaking his curse upon the town for all to hear? Shh! Trying to sleep! And coming in at number 1, House of Seven Gables. Locals say the Turner Ingersoll Mansion, or also known as famously the House of Seven Gables, is the most haunted spot in Salem. How many haunted spots are there? Ghosts are just like really competitive. Now a prominent museum, protected in its original form, used for plays and reenactments by the locals, the original structure was simple in nature, with only 2.5 rooms and just under 3 stories tall. By the time of John Turner's death, the prominent merchant, sea captain, and owner of the house, he was one of the most wealthy men in the entirety of Massachusetts. Turner and Ingersoll's House of the Seven Gables is a ghostly reminder of the tormented souls both trying and being tried at the time of the hangings. But the Turner Ingersoll is a reminder for more than just lost shipping fortunes and curses, as it's also a homely reminder of Judge Hawthorne himself and the guilt he inflicted on that town. As records show, Hawthorne may have feigned sympathy for the accused witches, but he never regretted his involvement in their trials or executions. And he certainly never expressed any remorse during the trials themselves for sending the accused to their death. Following the witch hysteria of the late 1600s, the Hawthorne family lost most of their wealth, no doubt influenced by the families of the accused witches who sought out justice for their dead loved ones. Acting now is only a museum of historic place. Each year, the museum hosts a series of theatrical plays, all of which surrounding the Salem witch trials. Such plays titled as Legacy of the Hanging, Judge Hawthorne, and Spirits of the Gables. But some of the actors aren't, well, very alive. As for the ghosts outside of the theatrical performances, well, everybody's got their own opinions on that. But tour guides and employees tend to avoid the attic, where some people have complained about being choked by ghostly figures. Local lore has many different stories to tell, and so do many of the visitors who enter Salem's most haunted house. Others report seeing a phantom boy who enjoys playing in the attic. Throughout the day, his giggles and laughs can be heard. Always giggling kids, eh? They're like the scariest ghosts.